Ladies and gentlemen, if I can have your attention, please. Howdy. Howdy. Good afternoon. Welcome to Texas A&M Law School. I'm Eric Short. I'm the interim dean here at the law school, and I'm thrilled that you're all here today. It's a beautiful day. I just ran into a student who said that he's already finished up his round of golf for the day, so I was jealous. Thank you all for being here on such a lovely day. This is an exciting time for the law school. We've transitioned this year to become the law school for Texas A&M University. We have gone through a lot of transitions this year to make that changeover. We're very excited to be a part of the university. In particular, I'm most excited about the academic programs that we hope to develop in the coming years. We have historic strengths in the areas of intellectual property and business law and natural resources, and those are perfect fits for the relationship with Texas A&M. I've already been working with the other deans in College Station to develop some collaborative educational programs, some certificates, some joint degrees, and I hope that we're going to be able to marry our resources here at the law school with resources in College Station to develop some really world-class law training programs here in Fort Worth. So this lecture, which is a lecture this year, and we hope to turn this into a lecture series, is a logical outgrowth of that sort of collaboration. So we're thrilled that I'm going to get this right, the Water Management and Hydrological Science program in College Station and the College of Geosciences is helping to sponsor and set up the logistics for this event. And we hope that this is the start of many collaborative efforts with College Station. I want to also thank the Water Asset Management Group for their sponsorship of this event as well. So we have a wonderful faculty in the area of natural resources, among them Professor Tim Mulvaney and Professor Gina Warren, both accomplished scholars and teachers in the area. And our water law program is headed up by Professor Gabriel Eckstein, who's extraordinary. Fascinating man, very interesting background, and very interesting expertise. He's always one of the experts on the faculty that I tout when I go out and I talk about our experts on the faculty. He really is in that small group of international water rights experts. Professor Eckstein is the director of our International Water Law Project. He's the treasurer of the International Water Resources Association, and he's on the executive council of the International Association for Water Law. We are very happy to have Professor Young here today for our lecture, and I'm going to now turn things over to Professor Eckstein to do the formal introduction. Welcome.
Thank you all for being here. I'm absolutely delighted to see everybody here. Such a great crowd. I know everybody's interested in this topic of water, and rightly so. As you all know, we live in Texas, and this has become a very serious issue for all of us here. Population growth is expected to increase by 80 to 90% in the next 45 to 50 years. Our water demand right now is around 18 million acre feet. And what's an acre feet? Put that aside, but figure out, just look at the number of 18 really large amount units of water. That's now. In 2060, that's expected to increase to 22 million acre feet. So we're going to add the demand, at least. We're going to need more water for what? For all of our activities, for agriculture, for municipal use, for industry, for that iced tea that you have on the table. The problem is that our supply is not going to keep up with our demand. Right now, we're already in a deficit. Remember that 18 million acre feet number? Our annual supply here in Texas is actually only 17 million acre feet. So we're already in a deficit. And by 2060, it's projected to drop to 15.3 million acre feet. We're going to have a deficit of 25 to 30, maybe more percent in terms of our water supply versus water demand. And we're going to have to come up with that. We're going to have to fill that gap somehow. desalination, whether from ocean, from brackish aquifers, better management of our water resources. We have all sorts of ideas and solutions that have been proposed, and this is something that we're continuing to explore here in Texas. What is the way we should go about meeting that growing demand? And it's not just projected demand. We know the demand will be there. The population is going to grow. We want the economy to continue to grow. We know we need agriculture, so we know we're going to have water. On top of this, as you all know, over the last couple of years, we've had what's been described as a drought of historical proportion. We had a very, very serious drought here in the 1950s, and then a couple of years ago, we've had the single worst year in recorded history in terms of scarcity, the heat index, and the lack of rainfall. And this is something that is actually projected to continue and worsen. As bad as it is here in the U.S., imagine what it's like to have summers of 130 degrees Fahrenheit. Imagine what it's like to be under conditions where not only a drought of historical proportion, but what's been described as a millennium drought, a drought that comes around once every 1,000 or so years. That's Australia. That's the situation on the Australian continent today, and has been for the last number of years. In fact, they've been on and off in droughts for the last couple of decades, and they have had to investigate and research and implement innovative solutions because there's just no choice. They had to come up with a solution to meet their growing population's needs, their growing economy, and so on. And they've undertaken quite a number of radical solutions. And I think that there are tremendous lessons that can be learned from their experience as well as from other places around the world. So we're extremely excited, delighted to have Professor Young here to tell us a little bit about that Australian experience and share with us some of the ideas that have been generated in Australia and elsewhere around the world. Maybe there's something we can all learn from, some lesson we can take to heart here in Texas. Professor Young holds a research chair in water and environmental policy at the University of Adelaide. He was the founding executive director of its Environmental Institute. He is a fellow of the Academy of Social Sciences in Australia and a distinguished fellow of the Australian Agricultural and Resource Economics Society. He is currently the Whitlam and Malcolm Fraser Chair in Australian Studies in Harvard University for this academic year. This is a rotating, as I understand it, a rotating chair, and he's been selected from all of Australia to hold this chair for this academic year. Professor Young is probably best known for his contributions to the development of natural resources and environmental policies, and most recently, over the last number of years, his research is focused on the use and design of market-based instruments in the water resources sector. And he's played a very critical role in Australia, particularly in the Murray-Darling Basin area, in terms of developing the policies and the structures and the methods that they've implemented in that part of Australia to respond to their own water crises that they've had. So I'm delighted to introduce Professor Mike Young. I'm also delighted, let me just say, I'm very delighted Dean Short mentioned Water Asset Management as our luncheon sponsor here. This is a firm that's focused on securing capital and innovative solutions to ensure water supplies and water quality. So it very much fits in with what is happening in Texas in terms of looking for solutions, looking for opportunities, looking for possibilities to respond to these water challenges that are facing us. So we're delighted to have Water Asset Management here. We're very delighted to have Professor Young here. And so let me present the podium to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think I can walk around a little bit rather than be trapped behind this. And as I told you, thanks for the chance to be here. And forgive my Australian accent. I haven't yet learned to speak Texan, but we're getting there. I want to talk to you about something which is part of my passion, but I think it's a very important question, and that is really whether or not Texas is missing an opportunity as it talks about how to manage water in the future. And the opportunity is really around water and water rights. And there's one thing I've learned being over in America is people think rights are very important, and they are. I thought I'd start with a little story that's about prime ministers. We call our president a prime minister, and we have a slightly different system, but they're the same sort of people. There's a very important prime minister in Australia who had a wonderful wit and he used to carry on, have a lot of fun, called Paul Keating. And back in 1986, he was really worried about what was happening, and he'd just become prime minister. And he said that if this government cannot get adjustment going, cannot get manufacturing going, and cannot keep wages under control, and have a sensible economic policy, essentially he would have said we're all going to be stuffed. And he said no, he said we've got a real problem, we'll become a banana republic. What he was really worried about was that every year Australia on a per capita wealth basis was getting poorer. And other countries around the world were doing better than Australia. And so he commissioned a report to find out why. He said, what the hell's wrong with Australia? We've got to fix this place up because we're going out backwards and I don't want to run a banana republic. Out of that came a recognition that competition was important. And one of the things he said we had to fix up was water. He said we just had the fundamentals of water management wrong. And it was not working in terms of an economic sense. And the normal stuff that's talked about when people talk about water is you've got to fix up the infrastructure, build some more dams, build some more pipes, find some more water. It worked out there actually wasn't any more water to be found. There's a little bit. And desalination was horrendously expensive, and it's better to find another way and a smarter way. And out of that came a transition to committing to search for and to find the best way to manage water, and particularly to improve our water right and allocation regime. He said there might be a better way to define water rights. And that's really the journey that Australia's been on. Texas has a complicated system for both its ground and surface water, and I'm not an authority on it. And I've spent a little bit of time reading and trying to understand how this works, and Gabriel has given me some wonderful documents to read. And it sounds awfully complicated, and I'm sure you need a lot of lawyers to manage it and cope with it. But I would suggest when I look at it, that the regimes you have were designed for an era that's passed. When I read it all, it was really designed, the surface water was designed to enable mining and development and to guard early assets and development of rivers and have seniority systems. Your groundwater system doesn't seem to quite understand that supplies might change, and there's some things like connectivity that need to be together. So 3 questions. What would a state-of-the-art water entitlement and allocation system look like? And I use water and entitlement systems meaningfully because we used to debate water rights in Australia with everybody, and every time we talked about water rights we had an argument about law. We were all amateur experts on rights. So we invented some new language and started talking about entitlements and allocations and obligations, and made very, very fast progress because everybody had to talk about what they meant rather than talking about rights. It was a very important step forward. And if having identified such a system, would you be better off under such a system? So first of all, see what it would look like. Imagine a blank sheet, no history, no traditions, no past. What would you do? What would it look like? And then ask, would you be better off under that? And then thirdly, is there a politically acceptable way to get there? I've been in Harvard for the last year teaching people about how to think like this. Design the best system, work out if it's better than what you've got. If it's dramatically better, then work out if there's a way to get there. Let me have a go. Texas, as you know, is rapidly expanding its population, and all these people are going to want water and want access to it. The state water plans say you've got a problem, as Gabriel said. I don't need to rehearse this with you. In Australia, and I need to move quickly with the Murray-Darling Basin. The most important piece, I think, of water insight that ever happened back in 1885. Alfred Deakin, the man who became our first president, when we first formed Australia, sailed over to America and came back and wrote a brilliant report and said, do not set up a seniority-based water allocation system like they have in America. He said it'll drive you into all sorts of tangled problems down the track. And he came up with a different framework. Paul Keating had his famous statement when he was Prime Minister, like your President. Can you imagine Obama coming out and saying, I'm really worried America's becoming actually a banana republic under my leadership, and I want to turn the country round? But it's a very, very important question to ask. Where are you going strategically? Out of that came a commitment to be incredibly competitive, to open up a water market and allow trading between states. No state was allowed to protect each other. We'd always put the water to where it could be best used in the nation, create the wealth and then distribute it. Surprisingly, and I could come back and talk more about it, the people who first let their water go to another state made so much money from selling it off they then bought it back. And areas that were depressed became prosperous because of all the innovation that happened. We then converted our entire rights system through to one which is based on shares. Shares of what's available, just like shares in a company. We set up a national water initiative, then decided that to really get all of the problems solved here, we had to take politics out of water management and put people in charge who understood hydrology, understood business. And so we set up an independent authority and decided that authority would only have 5 people in it, because the state of art in management and governance says if you have a small board, the board's expected to function. If you have a committee of 10, 20, 15 people, the way we used to do it, people would say, I went to that bloody meeting and it didn't work. I tried my best, I'm trying to get it right. But if there's only 4 or 5 there, it's not socially acceptable to not run the show properly. That's why most businesses around this world have small boards, for good reasons. Board members are expected to get it right. And we decided to take the brave risk and put 5 people in charge of running a very, very complicated system, which includes all the groundwater as well. And now we have a basin plan which is signed off, which takes 1/3 of the water away from the irrigation community and puts it back into the environment. And everybody's happy. And the value of water is still going up. And the communities are still prosperous. What happened when we started and we were prepared to change our water allocation system is fascinating. But first, the farmers, particularly the irrigators, were really frightened and were terrified. This is the profit, the internal rate of return. This is 20% per annum. For the first decade, the value of water rights in the southern part of the River Murray system, as we improved the system, never went below 15% per annum in terms of improvement. It didn't take long before the farmers worked out that their asset was really rising in value. We started saying, you want to go back to the old regime? And they said, no. They want to have vicious fights about how to improve it, make it better. But they knew they were in the right direction. The light blue bit is the return from owning what you call a water right. We can turn them into shares. And the dark blue is the money that's earned from actually trading water itself and using it. And once we moved over, the reason why there's such a rapid jump in the light blue is the farmers knew it was going to work and people started investing. We got really surprised because people who'd been trying to sell technology to Israel and other places started coming to Australia. Everybody who had a good water idea came to Australia because Australian water users were suddenly interested in making money out of water because we did one thing. We went to a very carefully designed system that was designed to work. This red line is from owning Australian shares. Notice that water was a fantastic asset as we were restructuring it. I'll go on talking about that, but I want to talk about the drought very quickly. We did this, and Paul Keating did it because he wanted to make money out of water. He said if you get water management right, then you can build a prosperous economy on top of it. If you mismanage and fight over water and play politics short term, your economy goes backward. And I think Texas is probably at that stage. Water is so critical to so many of your businesses. If you get it right, then people will come here and invest. What happened in 2000 as we started the millennium drought, which was terrifying. Our rivers stopped flowing, we ran out of water. The amazing thing though is that as it got drier, we actually took back, it's the normal up the top, 12,000 is a full normal year that we'd all got used to. By 2007, 2008, people who are used to having a full allocation were getting a third. But this red line is the value of agricultural production. It only dropped 20%. What we were doing was we were innovating and investing so fast and buying in new technology that it all worked. And this was all market driven. People were doing things because they were allowed to sell water to anybody. We scrapped things like actually beneficial use, no restrictions on where water was used. It would always be just going to wherever it should go to. And this was what really happened. We started off water trading in 1995, very open, free trading. Now in Australia, you can move water from one state to another in 2 days, and no lawyer can get involved in stopping it. What we do is we write water management plans, and we get everybody involved in having a fight, and we set all the exchange rates, sign off on the plan, and then that's the rules. And if a trade's done in a way which is consistent with the agreed rules, nobody can stop it. If you don't like the plan, go and change the plan, but you do not stop the good, smart use of water while you argue. It's a very important principle. The key features that drove the investment was first allocating water rights to individuals. In many cases, we had districts that used to insist that the water had to stay in their district. We said, no, water should be free to trade from one district to another. And it was fascinating to see people in Shepparton, for example, who were paying really high charges for water use in their district, suddenly see water leave. And the board responsible for Shepparton sat down and thought, we've got a problem here. So instead of just locking all the water up, they fixed up their irrigation system. It was an old, run-down, hopeless irrigation system, and it needed to be fixed up. And the board managers suddenly knew that they could no longer protect themselves, so they let the obvious thing happen. The water had to leave, and it started leaving. And why would you pay $40 of actually a megalitre to get water delivered to you when you can trade it outside the district to another farm you've bought and supply it to yourself for 10? And that's what people were doing. It didn't take long for the people in Shepparton to work out they needed to fix up their water, the whole water management system. And it was these changes that fixed up the whole community. You decide to fix it up, you bring in all of the investors, all the new technology comes in, you have a vibrant future. We unbundled and set up a market in water shares and in allocations. Very, very efficient. We decided that we could no longer guarantee water. A lot of people thought they had guaranteed volumes. So you can have a share of what's available. We can promise you to have a share of what's available, but that share might be zero. And in some years in the drought, for a lot of people, it was zero, or very, very close to zero. And we issued statements and plans where we said we will set the limit in each catchment, maximum amount that can be taken, and define it as a robust limit. That was a very important process. We took away all of the controls on use, so you didn't have to keep on using it to grow rice, or using it to grow grass for cows, or anything with tradition. All the traditions were scrapped. We had urban people coming in and buying up water. I live in Adelaide, and my city of Adelaide went into Victoria, another state, and bought water that it needed and paid very high prices for it. The money that was paid for the water was then reinvested in fixing up the irrigation system in Shepparton. And by making the system more efficient, they didn't need as much water, and they used the sale of water to fund the innovation. And these stories just go on and on and on. We set up water registers where the share registers are guaranteed by government. And in Australia, we don't have title insurance. If I want to buy some water from Jay, what I actually contract to do in a legal sense is to change the register, and the law says whoever's name is on the register is the owner. If you want to become the owner, you have to change the register. So you don't need to have any title searches or anything. Everybody can read and see who owns it. And we let banks register mortgages on the same register. So the banking industry suddenly got really excited because a small irrigator had $100,000 worth of water. A large one might have several $1 million worth of water. The banks got really interested in transitioning through to a system where you could register financial instruments really quickly. These things all matter. We decided already set to get the politicians and the lawyers out of trying to control the ongoing destruction process. They can be involved in the plans, but when the plans are locked in, we get on with business. And we don't let legal processes stop progress. And what we found, this was critically important, because in 2006, it forgot to rain. And we had to move massive, there were 15,000 irrigators who suddenly had enough water for about 3,000 of them. And the market we'd set it up worked it all out in 2 weeks. There's no political committee that could solve that problem that fast. Water prices went up, lots of innovation happened. One of my closest friends, a very successful dairy farmer, said, if water is that valuable, I will stop irrigating tomorrow, I'll dry out my cows, and I'll stop making milk. So he sold all his water and he sat down and said, it's a drought, there's a lot of cheap grain around, there's a lot of grain that cannot be used for anything other than animal feed. So he went out and bought all the grain, kept on feeding his cows grain. And guess what happened? His profits went up, his butterfat yields went up, and he now no longer irrigates because he's found that feeding his cows with grain is more profitable than growing grass. And this is the sorts of innovations that happen. We found so many blind spots because we weren't forced to look. We then started charging the full cost of infrastructure. We took government out of managing the infrastructure, and the government gave the irrigators, the companies they'd set up for nothing, and said, you manage it. What did the irrigators do? They sacked half the staff, all the ones who were incompetent and been there for years, brought in really smart management, and for the next 5 years, the cost of water supply went down and down and down and down because the innovation was happening. They didn't want to stand back. And then, on top of that, we started issuing shares to the environment. We brought the environment in, so the environment, rather than being something that always came first in law, but was always last and always being actually compromised, was given a share. So whenever you allocate water to anybody, you have to allocate water to the rights holders, which includes the environment. And guess what's happened? Environmental management has now become science. And instead of being an environmental manager who writes reports and complains and stands before the media and says the river's been ruined, these environmental managers have got water in dams to allocate, and they want to know how long to put water where and how. And they're going back to the irrigation industry to learn how to irrigate the environment. And we're getting massive improvements and really exciting outcomes as we take environmental management seriously. So these are all the features of something which I think makes a lot of sense. Essentially, we went through a process where we took water rights and we did what in academic terms is called unbundling. We issued shares in perpetuity. We went to the banks and said, how do you run really smart allocation systems? And you all probably here all have a bank account, and you can look in and see what's just been credited to your account. When you use it, it gets debited. We said, why can't you do that for water? Why can't you have a system where you log in, and if I wanted to transfer some water to Jay, I just find out Jay's account and transfer some water off my account and onto his account. It goes to an exchange rate and it's done. This is not rocket science. And the smart bits of people around the world have management systems that look like this, that are used for water. They're also used in fisheries management too. I want you to think about whether or not some of the things I'm talking about might have the elements of what would be a smart water management system that you adopt anywhere in the world. And it's interesting, by the way, I've just been over in the Netherlands and I've written a report for the Dutch who are just discovering a thing called water scarcity. And they're very, very interested in converting to a system that manages scarcity well. For them, it's a totally new experience. So the elements of what a robust system would look like. And the thing about robust systems is they work under extreme pressure. They're designed to work when you really are in severe droughts, not to work well in the average. Most of the world's water allocation systems are designed to work in average conditions and when things are not too tough. The thing that makes a really big difference is when you get into the sorts of crises that Australia's been going through and you see them solve problems as fast as water runs out. And I can assure you, water can run out in weeks. And it's awful when it happens, but you need to have systems that are designed to cope with it. So if you think about how you would do such a thing, you'd write some statewide legislation that would enable you to transfer from the current system through to whatever system you design. And then for each resource, you'd set some statutory plans that talk about how you're going to work out, first of all, how much water can be taken, when it can be taken, and then secondly, define what type of sharing system you're going to have. If you think in an old seniority system which has everybody's rights defined differently as the way to do it, then you might need to think again. Because one of the things you really need, and we learned was so important, was to have what we call fungible assets. And they're assets which are identical to each other. If every water right is specified differently, then every time everybody wants to change the way it's used, you've got to work out very complicated things. So what we did is we converted everybody into standardised shares. There's Class A shares, or Class B and Class C. We call them high priority and then general and so forth. But by having only 3 types of shares in each system, then you can move shares from one another. There's no contest about whether it's going to affect a third party because it's all identical. You solved all that like here. So if you wrote the state legislation, what would it look like? It would establish a really good water sharing and planning and allocation powers. It would set out some core objectives and principles about how you're going to manage environmental water, who's going to pay, what you put together. You'd define your preferred entitlement and allocation regime. I use the word entitlement and allocation advisedly. I think it's smarter if you stop talking about rights. Because when you talk about rights, as I've said, people become amateur lawyers and have arguments over what's my right, rather what am I entitled to, and if there's no water, what's my share going to be?
Just want to explain the difference between an entitlement and allocation.
Yes, that's very important. Entitlement is a share. It is your long-term interest in a resource. You think of shares in a company, which is your entitlement to receive dividends when they are earned and available. And what's happened in Australia and what's happened in fisheries management and lots of the world-leading parts of the world too, you decided really all you can give people is shares of what's available. And when there's something to be allocated, it's allocated in proportion to the number of shares you hold. And that's an entitlement. Allocations are when you have physical amounts of water. Sometimes it can just be time slots as well, the water that's available in 1 week or in the next week. But you manage the allocation separately from the entitlements or the shares. And that's been a very important innovation. Out of that you get 2 very, very different things that can be traded. The shares are the value, the long-term thing that drives, that actually drives and funds efficient investment. While the allocations sort out day-to-day water use. We know in Australia, if you look at the water allocation market, the price of water goes up and down as the weather forecast changes. If there's rain coming in on Saturday, the price will go down. Because people know they don't need as much water and they'll sell it. We'll see someone else use it. So it goes on. You set up arrangements for governance. I would suggest you'd probably do what we did, is put some experts in charge of actually managing water and take the politics out of it. It's not rocket science, but needs damn good engineers and damn good hydrologists to work out how much water it is. If you have a really robust sharing system and allocation system, you don't play politics. And when you stop playing politics, the investors start investing. And the value goes up, and your economies become much more prosperous because you can plan with confidence. If you're sitting there looking at water and thinking, what's the government going to do next? How is this going to be sorted out? You don't invest. If you know, if you've got so many shares, and if you can confidently trust the independent board to work out how to get the water to you quickly, then you invest with confidence. And you don't get surprised when people from all over the world start coming to work with you to bring in new technology. If I'm a rice farmer in Collyamberley and I was over here using my iPhone, I could water my paddock. I have the water go on, and I could be confident it would go on. I don't need to be anymore. Some farmers worked that system out, working with an Australian company, Rubicon, that's now being sold all around the world, because it saved them about 30% of their losses. And they're incredibly prosperous because they developed that technology. I can see Texas going down a similar road if it's prepared to think about building a robust system. The board would probably have less than 7 members. The science and researchers around, you go to Harvard Kennedy School where I'm working at the moment, and they say keep it under 7 and you'll always have consensus, or nearly always have it. They can approve water resource management plans. They set up control over the trading arrangements, charging arrangements, do things like deal with insider trading, make sure it doesn't happen. We found, by the way, that one of the things when we had politicians involved in allocating water, that they would forget about insider trading rules. And they'd tell some of their friends or consult about if I change the policy like this, what would happen? And then one of my students actually went out and he did a thesis on the degree of insider trading occurring, and suddenly they got totally out of it because they realised that this is not the sort of thing that prosperous nations do. And you limit the third-party appeal process to sorting out the plan. And you facilitate, and this is the bit which we haven't done, but I think really makes sense. We have done it in one other system that I'm aware of, where rather than saying to everybody we have to convert to the new system, you build the new system alongside the old system, and you let people voluntarily move over from an old right to a new sharing system. Watch what happens. If the value of the new system is going up something like 20% per annum, it doesn't take long for people to work out that it might be smart to be in the new system. Particularly if you want to borrow some money and you go to the banks and the banks say, well, if you want to borrow, get your water into the new system and then we'll talk to you. That's what happens in the best of the systems we've set up. And I would think that you could build such a framework here. So you don't threaten everybody with throwing out the old, going with the new. You build the new system alongside and let people move on. You can build it in 1 or 2 areas, trial, build the capacity, sort out the problems. And I will be honest with you that in building the Australian systems that we've built, we've made massive mistakes. I would hate you have to make all the mistakes we did, but when you're the first people trying to walk in difficult, uncharted territory, you make mistakes. The same thing happened with actually fisheries in New Zealand when they first did it. They had to go back and amend their legislation 14 times. But it was the industry going to the politicians, and including, by the way, the Maori people who really liked the new system and said, we've got to fix up the problems. The strategy's right, but we want a system that we think is world-class. And they have a world-class fishery system as we do in Australia, and we have a world-class water management system. Water resource plans would set abstraction limits, would probably do things like close off resources when they're 70% of their potential and issue the remaining shares to somebody. You close it so you have an early market. You don't trade into trouble. You don't run your resources down. You plan to hit the limit and you make sure you walk into it. You establish the rules. You would have priority classes, probably 3 or 4 classes of shares, and you'd manage use separately. People do have to have permits in some areas which require you to have meters and all the other conditions of use, but that can be managed separately. and you have a formal allocation and accounting system. The permits, I don't need to go into detail, but you'd expect all water use to be metered. No exceptions. One of the great things that saved Australia is the decision to require everybody to meter water use. And then we ran a process which was really important. We got people to understand that when they take more water than they're entitled to do it, they were stealing from their neighbours, not from the government. And we redesigned the governance arrangements so that people started talking about who they were really stealing water from. I don't think you have meters everywhere yet here. If you don't have meters, you can't control, and you don't get the investment because people expect people to cheat. And if you're investing in a system where people cheat, then you're very, very cautious about what you do. If you run a system that has integrity, it's bankable. And if it's bankable, then people come to work with you. Businesses come to invest with you. And even environmental managers start to come and work with you. And you'd probably issue unit shares. As I've said, they'd be issued in perpetuity. The registers would be guaranteed and mortgageable. These are all pretty standard things. And you'd probably have several classes, and you make it so it's possible for anybody to invest in water. We're seeing people from America, people from China coming investing in Australia and buying water in Australia. We used to be worried about that. We're now excited by it because it frees up capital we can use for other things. And we're more interested in using water to make money. If someone else wants to bring capital in, that's fine. And the really surprising thing is it took us a while to work out. It's a bit hard for the Chinese or the Americans to take the water away. The only way it can usefully be used for anything is if you use it in Australia. So they're not going to pinch it. So stop worrying. Really important issues. The allocation regime I don't need to spend too much time talking about, but in ground and water and regulated systems it would be actually volumetric probably. In unregulated systems which flow really quickly after floods and after rains, where there's no control over the rate of flow, you need a time slot, an allocation system, and you allocate times when water can be available, but you can bank those very, very well. So what's gone in a framework like this? The first thing you do is you make everything very fungible, so people can trade quickly and easily. You take away all restrictions on use. Stop worrying about whether or not people are only allowed to sell water if it's going to be used for the same use. Because what that means is people then have an incentive to save water. When we had a system where we controlled use, people would say, well, if I change use, the water might be taken away from me. So I won't change use and I won't innovate. When we took it away, everybody invested, traded, and we had the innovation. What's gained? I think you gain a system which would facilitate improvement, allow opportunity to adjust. You have a system which has real value and which grows in value even in times of scarcity. And that's very, very important. And you have something which you can bank off through into the future, an entire system that you can trust and have confidence in. The transition arrangements, I think I've given you enough clues about what would happen. The really difficult issue is how you go from your existing rights system through to something that's new. And the framework that I think you do is you take all of your old, very senior rights, say before 1900, and convert them all into what we would call high security shares. And they would receive the first allocations. And you just convert volumes in terms of acre feet through into numbers of shares in the high security pool. Then you take something like 1990 to 1945 and do the same thing in the second group, and then all the rest in the third group. That's not rocket science. It's pretty easy to do conceptually. Working out the conversion factors and doing it is something that you'd have to learn to get some skills in. But it's very easy once you sit down and work through it to work out the detail and get on with it. Having made that step and put it in place with a set of lookup tables, you can sit back and you leave people the choice between staying in the old system, which is not worth as much money as the new system, or moving across. I would predict you'd get very rapid and fast transition to the new system. So that's a sort of a framework and a vision. And let me close by going back to the questions that I tried to float to you. What does a state-of-the-art water management system look like? I think it would be built around the framework which forces you to plan for water scarcity and legislate, protect those plans so they stand up in courts and cannot be changed easily. Have shares as the long-term, what you would call a water right, and have allocations as well, properly managed and properly metered, so you can move as fast as environments change. Would water users in Texas be better off under such a regime? I think they would. I haven't worked out the detail. That's a challenge, and you'd need somebody to come and spend quite a bit of time down here to flesh out the detail. But think of systems where you can bank on your water, you can go to your bank manager and they'll lend against it quickly and easily, and they prefer to do that than anything else. Where as these new industries come in, they're not at all worried about where they're going to get the water from, because they go and buy it. And willing buyers and willing sellers get together and sort it all out quickly. And if there's some spare water available, it's always used for its best use. And everybody's interested in saving water, which is where we are in Australia now. And is there a politically acceptable transition pathway? I can see a way you could put it together, but it would require the people of Texas to become water literate, to understand the basics of investment and good management of environment. Australia started off just on a journey of trying to make money out of water. We discovered more than anything, though, that when you suddenly run out of water, having a really good system keeps you prosperous and keeps your environment in good health. If I was a Texan, I would start a new conversation, and as you roll out your next and future water plans, I would include in it the discussions around that, the discussion about whether or not you have a water allocation or a water rights system which is appropriate for this century. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. I'm going to walk around here because you are recording. I appreciate if you can identify yourself and ask your question to the microphone.
I'm Mark Pape with the U.S. Rain Group. I guess the question would be, you're an entire nation that had several states that was working together. Is it possible to do this just Texas when all the other states wouldn't be going this direction?
I asked that question because I was fortunate to get the Australia chair, or be chosen from the Australian academic community to go to Harvard. And when I first started thinking about it, I had a vision that this could come from Washington and spread all over. And I said, no. I started talking to people and I said, we'll do the Colorado system. And I thought, no. And I was lucky enough to start talking to people, including Gabriel, about Texas. I actually came quite quickly to the conclusion that Texan people are brave and different and could well lead America in demonstrating how to do this. And you gain a double advantage. Not only would you get all of the benefits from fixing up your own water allocation systems and the prosperity that comes from that, but as well as that, you would then have the knowledge which you could transfer to the rest of the United States. So if you ask me where I'd start, I would start in Texas.
You came up with a very interesting non-political system, but how do you get a political system to create a non-political regime to allow it? My experience is the politicians don't easily give up anything.
Through a lot of careful discussion on entrepreneurship. In the early stages of building this, I guess it was people like me and some others who started talking in this language. We wrote reports that were designed to convince people that this was the way to go. And it was a long strategy that was put together. The politicians, at the same time, started to learn and started to understand that it was more important to get this right than to be the people who was seen to be mismanaging. And we were careful as we went through to reveal the opportunities that were being missed and to package this all up. So it was a combination. It was surprising how fast the politicians moved when the drought became really severe. The early stages came from leadership at the top, who were just worried about wealth, prosperity, and opportunities that were being missed. When I look at Texas, for example, I see this rapidly growing population and rapidly growing development of a vast mining industry and some severe environmental problems that all have to be accommodated and fixed simultaneously.
So how many years was your runway before you actually got the politicians to implement this?
The first bit was 2 years. That was to take the first commitment, and then there was a pause, and then there was a major design exercise, and it happened first in New South Wales, and I guess I was the architect of going to a sharing system and helped write the legislation. We sat down with a couple of politicians who could see the vision and wanted to get credit for being the people who solved it. And remember, politicians love being successful. And if you really offer something that looks like a really good solution, you can normally find a politician who wants to be the author of the process. And they got the credit for it. And the man who really put the major building blocks through is now, by the way, back chairing the Murray-Darling Basin Authority, because he got it and he developed the early stage, and was a very, very astute water politician. And he's now there as an independent chair. He'd been out of politics for a couple of years, and everybody said, where can we find a really good leader? The first person we appointed as the chair of the authority, how do I say this? I won't say why, but he resigned. And we then walked around and said, we actually need someone who's a really good communicator and who can work with community. Getting community buy-in was really important. One of the really important building blocks was building a system which the bank supported. It was really interesting. We went out, I had lots of meetings with actually senior people in the banking industry. We said, we really want a system like this. We would love to be able to record mortgages against actually what you call water rights. And that was a very important building block. And then we had strife with the environmentalists. We started talking about giving the environment an entitlement. We said, look, we've been always writing all these plans and promised we're going to look after the environment, but we haven't. What we did is we gave what used to be guaranteed volumetric entitlements to farmers and to towns, and when we got the hydrology wrong, we ran the environment down. And they were really angry about that. But when you bring them in as an equal shareholder, and you do things that's happened, for example, up in Maguire, in the dam up there, there's an environmental water account. But down there's a fantastic wetland. And every time the wetland floods, birds fly in from all over the world and start breeding there. But for the birds to hatch and fly away and survive, they need water for 30 days. And now the environmental managers manage water in the dam, and every time it gets up to about day 20, they call on the reserve to extend it out so we get the breeding events. Now the whole community is really excited because they now have instead of having all these deaths occurring all the time and these wetlands collapsing, they get the breeding events. And then the tourists then start coming to see these events and seeing the great excitement, and it all starts to cascade. And once you get the environmental people on side, you get the local community people on side, you get business on side, then people start seeing change. Another really exciting thing happened, which surprised me, was when we introduced shares and set them up so they were completely tradable. A lot of our older farmers in the irrigation areas retired and passed their farms onto their sons and daughters, minus the water. and they said, take the farm and you have to buy the water from me. And what part of the smart son said, "Oh, but Dad, you've forgotten I've been to university. I'm going to bring in a smart computer control thing. I'll take half of your work, and you're going to have to get rid of it to someone else." And they bought in the new technology and suddenly had businesses setting up, selling the new technology. And I discovered when I went to Koran that I could go and sit in the main street. All of the cars are brand new. I can have a nice cup of coffee. All the shops have been painted. So what's going on here? The prosperity came back because we started freeing things up. It's a long answer, but people in politics bring in these things that transform their communities, get excited and proud about the outcome. You just got to find the people who see the vision and articulate it well. The early stages, though, are come by having some people map out the template as I'm trying to do it and get you interested in starting the journey. And if you start the journey, we go to all of America.
My name is Jim Fletcher. To leverage on the last question, I'm involved with a lot of politicians in Texas. Who appoints this primary board and these secondary boards? Here, you know, we have a insidious problem that the politicians appoint boards, so you realize what happens with that.
Just caveat, the first thing is that the criteria of the board in the legislation has to have people with certain skills, and says they cannot be involved in the things that they represent or the skill set they're supposed to have. So if I'm knowledgeable about actually irrigation, I cannot have any ties to the irrigation industry if I'm the person who has to understand the irrigation industry. If I'm knowledgeable about hydrology, I cannot have any exposure to any firms that are involved in consulting and those sorts of things. So there's a specification that's put together. And then it's a political process, but it has to be a transparent one where people have to apply. And there's an interview process. So it has to be done in a proper manner. But then ultimately, yes, it is signed off by government in terms of who the people are. But remember, at the end of the day, the person who makes the announcement, this is the board. When the board's only 5, you have to be very careful. And there is a requirement to have a gender mix as well. In fact, 3 of the people on the board are women. And I wouldn't replace any of them, I damn could. But yes, it's a political process. But when it's 5, you've got to have a board that looks like it's going to function. And if it's not functioning, you've got a problem. Particularly when, and the other thing we do is we appoint the chair first. The chair has to be confident that he's got access to the right skills.
My name is Doug Carew. I'm a lawyer. Gets in the way of getting things done.
Well, actually, you make things happen now. You're the person that keeps the things as functional as it can be.
How do you handle the location issue? You know, the shares or the entitlements or allocations seem to be transferable on paper, but the water may not be where you want it to be used. How's that handled in your system?
By setting exchange rates that work up and down. In the detail and behind this, what we do is we take off what we call conveyance water or a base flow. It's called different things in different parts of the world. You work out what needs to just flow through the system. Then if there's water in dams, we actually allocate shares in the water that flows into the dams. And there's adjustment for conveyance losses as you go down. And these are all in the lookup tables and exchange rates. In our Southern Connected River Murray system, we have a high degree of control. There we just let actually volumes trade up and down the system with very few controls. There are some adjustments that are made as you go through constrictions like the Barmer Choke, for example. But what we do is rather than having to do it case by case, we sit back and run hydrological models to work out what the exchange rates are and how it can be adjusted.
River basin by river basin?
River basin by river, we're actually river reach by river reach. But it's not that hard once you start deciding to do it for a whole river. You can work it all out, you build lookup tables, and for lots take out the conveyance water too. We also leave all of the flood water, the really high flows, to the environment. We don't touch those. We don't let people harvest them. We say, look, that's for the environment.
We're going to continue without the floor microphone. Just speak up. Somebody on the other side. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
Yep.
In Texas, we have these archaic entities called river authorities, generic name, and they're able to mint money for the most part. They're obviously completely counter to this whole concept. Do you have any such facility in Australia that you had to get around?
Depending on where you were, there were various groups and authorities. We still use those groups for a lot of local management type stuff. One of the things we're very, very careful to do is to take a concept which in jargon terms is called subsidiarity. So you leave local things to be solved at a local level. The top-down authorities will stop local areas from protecting themselves against competition, but we have a lot of local structures that run infrastructure, run distribution systems, all within a carefully designed framework. But they don't get control of the whole lot. There's bits that have to be done for an entire system, bits for part of the system, and then there's local bits.
Yeah.
So yes, there is some careful design around that, and those local committees are given complete freedom to run things that are local, and by doing what we call this unbundling, all the things like the permits that require metering and everything are all done locally.
Yeah, unfortunately, these entities that we have here are not local. They'll control portions of a river that might run a third to half the distance of the state, and so they control. Have a heavy hand over the local authorities, unfortunately.
Yeah, and what does happen in the early stages of negotiations, people are very protective of the old system for a whole pile of reasons. Frequently, they're very proud of the progress they've been making. And it's a difficult conversation to have as you go forward. One of the things that I would suggest is that rather than trying to do all of the state in one hit, you write the legislation and then choose some areas to roll it out and make it work and demonstrate that it works well. I've written a plan for the United Kingdom, and they're out at the moment consulting with all of the water users in the 16 regions of the UK about whether or not they'll go to the new system. They're also saying they'll only go in 2 regions first, and who wants to put their hand up to be the first 2 to go. And we'll work out a lot of the detail. One of the big mistakes we made in Australia was to try and do everything all at once, and we hit a lot of local management problems. And one of the things which is very hard is when you decide and commit to working with stakeholders, as we did to work out the plans, because these plans that have all these lookup tables and things and trading and everything are very sensitive, and they matter a lot because they determine wealth and create all sorts of opportunity. And you need very skilled negotiators to sit down and talk through with the community in a calm way as the details worked out. And the capacity and skills needed to do that probably don't exist. And yes, you will make mistakes in the early stages as you learn to do it. We made some big ones. But the journey's worth doing.
I'm going to take a moderator prerogative and ask just a follow-up to that. Is the system designed to be a basin-wide system, and how does it work as between basins?
We replicate it in each basin. Deal very carefully with connectivity in areas that aren't connected at all. Obviously, you can't trade water from one system to another. So it cascades down. There's a basic framework which says this will be the way governance works.
Within the basin?
Yes, within the basin and even between basins. There's some high-level statewide and nationwide rules that require, for example, all water rights to be defined as shares, requires all water rights to be issued in perpetuity, and reason why we do that is we have a rule that says, look, if anybody wants to have access to more water, we first of all have to work out who's going to have access to less. And the way you do that is to do what we call close the basin. So you issue all the shares and there are no more shares that can ever be issued. The only way anybody can get access to water is to acquire some shares or buy water from somebody who has shares. That's a really good rule, by the way, to have a rule that says nobody can get access to water unless they find a way to get somebody to stop having access. Once you decide to do that, a lot of administrative stuff falls out. Oh, sorry.
I'm curious why you won't share between basins, because that would be very effective in Texas. What's the rationale if one basin doesn't have a lot of use and is willing to sell its shares to another that is prohibited?
No, it's not prohibited if you're prepared to build the pipeline and move the water across. But a lot of the discussions we've had about that, you actually can't move shares from one basin to another. You can own shares in one basin. If there's a way to pump the water through, then you can do that. But there has to be a physical way to transfer the water.
So you'll share the water, you're saying the shares retain?
The shares, so you have one company, if you like, that has all the shares. There's 100,000 shares in this basin, and that's all there is. And the water is always allocated to those shareholders. What they then do with the water is their choice. And if they want to pump it through into another system, they can. But they have to pay for the pumping costs and pay for the pipes and all the things that go with it. A bit which has been amazing is to see how much water actually efficiency is improved. First thing that happens is that there's massive investments in actually new technology and reducing leakages and things as people start saving water because it pays to save water. And so a lot of the schemes that were around about pumping and transferring water, in fact we built a whole pile of desal plants because our politicians panicked. They're all now at mothballs. We didn't need them. Yeah, unions. Right down back.
Sir, if water is going to be traded as a commodity and I don't own any water or any land that gets me any water, how does it affect me as a consumer? What does it do to my water bill every month?
Okay, that's a very good question. Depends if you're a consumer. So you live here?
I'm living in a house in Fort Worth, Texas.
Yeah.
What does my water bill look like before this is implemented? What does it look like after it's implemented? And how does it fluctuate as water scarcity increases?
Firstly, as water scarcity increases, then the value of water will go up. So yes, it will become more expensive to have it because the opportunity cost to a small extent will arise. But the reason for that is more people are coming into Texas. If it's the same number of people, then your water rights will probably not go up because the investment in efficiency, which will mean you'll be able to run your entire supply system much more efficiently, and you probably will have access to more water. Wouldn't be much as a household consumer. But also remember that in most of the water allocation systems that are like we have in Australia, and I suspect they are, most of the cost of water management are not so much in securing the water right, it's in all the treatment and pumping and pipes and everything else that happens. What we've discovered as we've gone through all of this whole water reform process is we've really improved urban water management as well. And so costs haven't gone up that much. They've gone up in some areas. Where they've gone up, it's largely because of growth in the region. And the choice has been either getting access to more expensive water, which means you have to buy it in, or foregoing the economic growth, or going to desalination. As I said, we made the horrible mistake of building desalination plants and now discovering we don't need them, and we're left with the embarrassing problem we still have to pay for the desalination plants. And one of the things that my city's done where I live is, yes, water prices have gone up a lot. The reason they've gone up is because we built a desalination plant that we don't need, and we still have to pay for that. If we understood how much progress we would make, how fast we would make it, we wouldn't have actually built those plants. But time, no nobody was prepared to take that risk. I don't know if that answers your question. You'll be much better off as a result. The thing which is really exciting is seeing how much the whole commitment to investing in water has driven the economy and solved a whole pile of environmental problems. So the environment, the whole place is a better place to live in.
I think we have time for maybe one more question.
What's the incentive to build a reservoir in the system when you can't create any more water?
We had a lot of people talking about doing that, and we actually noticed that most of our dams were really full. And we then said, okay, where can we find new water storages? Put a lot of effort and spent a lot of money going around trying to find places where we could get water. And we kept on working out it was a lot cheaper to drive water use efficiency than to build dams that would normally be empty. We've also made a commitment that if we do go ahead with any new dams, then they have to pay. It has to be an economic proposition that adds up. But we haven't been able to find water storages that pass hard economic tests. In each case, it's better to drive the innovation than to build dams that would normally be empty. We can't find dams, perhaps you can here, which you can be confident are going to be full of water most of the time. One of the things we did learn early on, not early on, it was in 2006, in fact, Donna, Brendan and I did some economic modelling on this and wrote one of these things I call droplets, where we worked out that the water trading system that we'd set up in a drought was running our dams down too fast because we wouldn't let farmers save water for next year. The day we introduced what we call carryover, so farmers were given the choice between using the water, selling the water, or saving it for next year, the water price doubled because the farmers all knew that the dams were too empty. A smart thing to do was to leave water in the dams. So what we now do is have smart dam management, which takes into account what's happening in world prices, what's happening in expected rainfall, and what the future looks like, rather than having what we used to have, which is old, archaic rules that were written in rules of parliament made up by politicians. There's fixed rules that says when the dam's this high, you release this much water, when it's that high, you release this much water. When the market was saying, you'd be stupid to do that. And look at what the prospects are, look at the smartest way to make money, the smartest way to look after the environment, as we did, and I've now described, we now have local environmental groups, the committees you're talking about, have water entitlements to look after the environment. They decide which wetlands get water, when and for how long. So they're now really proud of what they're doing. Instead of being criticised because they got it wrong, they can stand up with pride and say, look what we did. And that's the difference. We have communities who are proud of what's going on.
I know there's some other questions out there, but we do have to cut this short. I really appreciate everybody coming out here. I really appreciate Mike Young coming out and giving us this really fascinating lecture. Please, everybody, join me. Thank you. A little token of our appreciation, a few things from Texas, from Texas A&M, and we really hope you can come back at some point.
Love to.
And continue this conversation. We hope all of you will help us continue this conversation. We hope we have this lecture series continue, and hopefully we can come up with ideas and suggestions and solutions for Texas. So thank you all for coming.